Guardians of the Galaxy is running out of the gate, and it's doing better than some of those dire predictions that we had at first. Perhaps positive word of mouth is going to save this film. We don't know that yet, but I've seen the film. I really liked it, although I recognize it is definitely not for everybody. I'm going to have a spoiler review of it in this video, but first we're going to talk about the X-Men. It turns out that a couple of big scares for Marvel, a couple of big flops, well, more than a couple, combined with a writer's strike, means that Marvel may be looking at some big-time changes for how they were originally approaching those all-important X-Men. Explaining entertainment, keeping you ahead of that culture curve. It's what we do each and every day here on the WDW Pro channel. I had someone recently ask me about why do we do what we do here on the channel? Why do we care so much about entertainment? What is it that makes us want to cover this as opposed to any other topic? And it was like, well, what is it that you dream about during the day while you're working? You want to go places, you want to see things, you talk about what movie you're going to watch, what TV show that you're watching. That's why it's so important. It's deeply resonating psychologically with all of us. And in the best form of entertainment, it is what we aspire to be. We watch our heroes and we wish to emulate them to some degree. And that's why we cover it, because it is dramatically impactful to so many of us, to society at large. And one of those properties that is very, very influential is, of course, the X-Men. Marvel is waiting to bring them in. Disney essentially acquired Fox and put themselves at major debt to get those pesky X-Men. Now that they've got them, what are they going to do? Well, let's set up some context. We're going to be doing some articles that literally are fresh off the presses. This one by Anthony D'Alessandro. We like D'Alessandro pretty well here. He's on Deadline, and the title of the article is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 Rockets to $17 million plus. Super Mario Brothers' first Illumination movie jumps past $500 million in the U.S. alone. This was a Friday AM box office update, but it's just a few hours old at the time of publication for this video. And that's because we have this updated segment here that we really need to pay attention to. Disney Marvel Studios' Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 saw a momentum last night with previews rising to 17.5 million, which is very good for the movie. I agree, and the people over at Marvel have got to be sighing a huge sigh of relief. There's been some concern heading into the weekend about how hard threequelitis is poised to hit this movie. Now, I like you, D'Alessandro. This is not threequelitis at all. That's not what's going on here. This is Marvelitis. So, which is very odd because it's a feature with a lot of heart. That's a lot of fun. Of that amount preview number, 400,000 was made from 100 IMAX shows on Wednesday, meaning that the Thursday preview dough for Guardians of the Galaxy 3 inches out that of Guardians of the Galaxy 2 by 100,000. That was 17 million. Now, that's not good. So let's talk about that. There are some positives here, and yes, this does have a major impact on X-Men. Wade will explain why. However, given that inflation is something like 30% more, okay, so box office sales, ticket sales, when you go to the movie, you're paying about 30% more than when Guardians of the Galaxy 2 came out. Then to just barely edge out Guardians of the Galaxy 2 by this latest, by the finale, not good. You would want to be running 30% higher. That would be what would indicate that you're at least holding on to the same level of audience. And ideally, when you're coming out with a new film, especially with a Marvel that is reeling, you really want to have growth. You want to show that you've had growth. That hasn't happened. There's been a retraction of the audience, and based on the inflation of movie ticket prices from 2017 until now, this does look like there's been a 30% retraction in the audience. Now, can Guardians of the Galaxy 3 bring the audience back on positive word of mouth now that the film is out and, frankly, it's good? Well, let's see. Something to ease Disney brows. Out of the gate, ComScore, Screen Engine, post-track scores were amazing last night with 5 stars, 94% positive, and an 80% recommend. Note the fanboys and girls always come out on Thursday, but still, at least the word of mouth is getting started. It goes into the demographics. I don't think the demographics are important for the first night. I'm just going to tell you. You need to be hesitant about anybody who goes into this stuff, at least on YouTube, and makes a big deal about the first weekend when it comes to these demographics. There are various groups that wait And so you need to know that and be aware of it. So yeah, be careful about putting too much emphasis on these percentages out of demographics, simply because some demos, they come the second week, they come during the week. And so you don't learn much out of that first weekend from these. So it goes on to talk about Guardians of the Galaxy. By the way, Chris Pratt, he has a lot to be proud of out of this weekend. Of course, he's starring in the top 2 movies, and this will almost certainly put him in the top, 2 of the top 4, let's say, for the year. Chris Pratt is probably the biggest star in Hollywood right now, and rumors of his career's demise, those come from people who are not serious. Chris Pratt is the biggest star out there right now, except for Tom Cruise. So pay very close attention to Chris Pratt, and he'll be coming back. All right, let's get into X-Men now. With that context understood, that Guardians of the Galaxy looks to be performing better than the worst predictions we had, but still not all roses, folks, okay? I mean, I'm happy for the film. I want it to do well. I know some of us are completely boycotting everything Disney. Maybe there's some people out there, although I cannot recommend that you do this. Perhaps there are people buying Mario tickets and going to see Guardians of the Galaxy. I don't know what's happening, and I don't want anybody to do that. But I just will say that Guardians of the Galaxy 3 is not a movie for everybody. It's not easy to watch in places. If you've had a traumatic event or something in the past, or if you're especially squeamish with cruelty or suffering, that kind of thing, it's going to be tough to watch. The ending, though, is what saves the movie, because it's not as good as the other 2 films. It's not as good as Guardians of the Galaxy 1. It's not as good as Guardians of the Galaxy 2. But the ending is, in my opinion, probably the best trilogy ending I've ever seen. And it's a masterclass in how you treat characters and how you love characters. You can tell James Gunn loves those characters. We'll talk a little bit more in a moment. X-Men 97 showrunner reveals the Disney Plus revival's main mutant characters. This by Nathaniel Braille. This was out on May 4th, yesterday, at the time of publication of this video. And there's something in here that's important that I think we need to pay attention to. There's a lot here that's just talking about stuff, but there's something really important inside of this article that we need to pay attention to. First of all, we know that Bo DeMaio, who is serving as head writer of X-Men 97, that's the person in charge of all of this, says that they're going to go with Storm and Cyclops. Again, this is the animated series replicating the 90s show and pretending to continue it on, and perhaps it will. We know that Bo DeMaio is kind of an odd person, right? We're not going to go into why. We've done a video on it before. Go look it up on my channel and see why Bo DeMaio is interesting. An eclectic individual who might give us pause on some of the quotes made in the past. But here is the interesting thing about it. So the interesting thing about Bo DeMaio is that he says in this and other articles that he was recommended to not change too many mutants or bring new mutants into the fold with the show. And what's interesting about that is that you would assume that came from somebody higher up, and you would assume that that means that somebody's looking at this and saying, you know what, we really don't want to mess with X-Men too much. Let's not go too avant-garde. Let's not go too out there. And Bo DeMaio certainly would if given the opportunity. But going with Storm and Cyclops in this show as your main runners, that's very safe. It's very good. And Cyclops is not the typical character you would expect some of these people to be going with. I'm not going to tell you why, but I bet you know. So going with Cyclops, interesting indeed. Now, talking about the X-Men, talking about the MCU, we know that they've had a number of flops. We know that they've had box office failures. We know that Phase 4 was largely the Phase 4 failure, and Phase 5 is largely the Phase 5 dive. Guardians of the Galaxy may actually do better. We'll see. But this is a time right now with Jonathan Majors going through a situation where he may not continue with the MCU. Right now is a time for the entire MCU to sit down and rethink things, because they can't continue to take the kinds of risks they've been taking. And these, not even B tier, but perhaps E and F tier characters they're bringing onto the big screens, those days are probably over as Disney looks to get hit after hit. Let's take a look at this article that literally just came out of Variety by Adam B. Very. Pins down what writers not working really means for the shows in production and movies, by the way. When A.C. Bradley was hired to write on the 2022 Disney Plus series Miss Marvel, part of her job entailed going to set every day to help with rewriting scenes on the fly while the show was being filmed. Not a good sign, by the way, if you're doing that. It was a mixture of everything from wanting to add new characters into the show to needing to change things because of location, Bradley tells Variety. Just one example, the day the production was set to shoot a chase sequence at a Marriott hotel, she helped to add a beat where the chase entered the kitchen because it was nearby. Why not use what you have? Well, it goes on to talk about what's going on with the writer's strike and the fact that now that the writer's strike is in place, they can't do anything in terms of writing, assisting, helping. These writers who are part of the union, the WGA, they're done. They're not going to continue until this strike is over. And as we've said before, this strike is largely about artificial intelligence. Whatever you may hear from other sources, the writers are terrified of artificial intelligence because it could easily replace at least 50% of their jobs. The rules are very clear that virtually nothing that a showrunner does is permitted, says Lowell Peterson, executive director of WGA East. Almost everything a showrunner does involves writing, and that's clearly prohibited, adds WGA East president Michael Winship. The minute I decided he should wear a red hat and he should wear a green hat, that's an editorial decision. All of these things essentially come down to writing. So basically, the writers union is saying to the showrunners who are not necessarily writers, if you make any editorial decision whatsoever, any creative decision at all, then that's writing. And so they'll come after you for that. Now, the reason I bring all of this up, and we'll read one more. With the strike, that critical element of the creative process is no longer available, which can especially hamstring a strategy like that of Marvel Studios that relies on finding and reshaping the story all the way through the edit. Often on big movies, especially, they're rewriting all the time, says the veteran. It's a constant process. At least 8 Marvel titles, feature films, The Marvels, Captain America New World Order, Blade, Deadpool 3, Secret Invasion, Agatha, Covenant of Chaos, Wonder Man, and Daredevil Born Again are currently still in production or post-production. And that doesn't even cover the ones that are in pre-production where the writing really takes place. Yes, all of those are frozen at the moment, and that's A-okay, actually. You might think, well, why? Well, the reason for that is because of the Jonathan Majors situation, the fact that Marvel has had so many losses recently. The studio, allegedly, according to a source that I've talked to that seems to be on the money over and over again, we'll enter rumor speculation now. Marvel may be looking at doing a reset at this point. They need to bring in the X-Men, they need to bring in the Fantastic Four, and they need to be excellent. I guess you could say they need to be fantastic. They can't have misses. And the introduction of the X-Men needs to go exceedingly well in order to grab back audiences. And Marvel has some work to do to recover ground that has been lost, clearly. You can look at just how bad Quantumania was, just how bad some of those prior movies were all throughout the last 2 years. And that's what's causing a fantastic film like Guardians of the Galaxy 3 to perform poorly out of the gate. Again, a 30% audience loss if the numbers hold true. That's not what you want to see. You don't want that to continue with the X-Men. That needs to be a way to bring back audiences and excite them once more. Well, the writer's strike gives them an opportunity to do that because right now everything's frozen. And that means that this is a very rare situation in which Marvel leadership can come together and remap out this and potentially bring the X-Men in an expedited manner. And that would be fantastic for them to do so, I think. As I watched the Guardians of the Galaxy 3 film and I watched how much James Gunn loved these characters and treated them well, I couldn't help but feel that Marvel really has competition on their hands now. I no longer have any hesitation about how good James Gunn will be with the DCU. He is phenomenal in taking care of characters. No, it's not the best movie ever, but he loves his characters and he loves that script and he loves those wacky oddball, that group. And he gives time to each and every, not just character, but actor to make them feel special. And that's special with the audience. If he does that with the DC universe, wow, it's going to be something to watch. So although I have concerns and fears, I suppose, like all of you, James Gunn is good. I mean, he's really good at what he does. And like a phoenix, I think he's really felt a redemptive moment coming back from a situation where he was fired and kind of put asunder by some things, some mistakes he had made in the past. But Chris Pratt, again, biggest guy in Hollywood other than Tom Cruise, Chris Pratt really saved his career. And people are talking about that. With the X-Men coming in, this is a chance for Marvel to try to save their careers. But they've got to get it right. They've got to do well with the X-Men. And this writer strike, talking about from Variety, especially if it continues on, it is the chance to do it. Now, I sat down with Chris Gore. You may all have heard of him before. He's originally from G4. Of course, not the attempt to bring that back, which went woefully poorly. He's also out with a new documentary called Attack of the Doc. He and I sat down and talked for a little bit about these corporations and how they don't necessarily understand franchises, especially nerd franchises. And I think it's pertinent to bring this up. Let's go to Chris now and see what he has to say about how these companies need to love on these franchises and bring in people who know what they're doing with them. And perhaps that's the same with X-Men. Marvel needs to find another James Gunn, and they need to find him fast. The pop culture is moving in some ways in the wrong direction. Of course, we know that all of this nerd stuff is more popular today than it once was. But at the same time, there are other parts of this stream that are not moving quite so quickly, or they are reverting. You brought up Star Wars. We could talk about elements of Star Trek, etc. Marvel now is no longer a guaranteed hit at the box office. That's a tremendous change in the trajectory of entertainment. And then finally, you brought up E3. E3 is canceled this year. What a tremendous alteration. Yeah. What do you think is causing some, and not small, but some significant elements of pop culture to be in a place that they don't want to be in?
Well, with regard to E3, I think that there has been, and Paul Chato did an excellent video about that, about the death of in-person events. More and more in-person events are not attracting the types of audiences that it did previously.
It's like the shopping center syndrome, right? It's like the malls of the 80s are now spreading out to conventions.
Exactly. Now, I go to a lot of conventions. I go to LA Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con, WonderCon. I try to get out to Dragon Con when I can.
Do you feel those are safe from this phenomenon?
I think so. But those events, to be clear, those all started as grassroots fan-run organizations. And with regard to San Diego Comic-Con, it still is something that's mostly volunteer. Most of the people that are at San Diego Comic-Con or WonderCon are volunteers, and it's truly a fan-run organization. Same thing with Dragon Con, LA Comic-Con, same thing. So a lot of the ones that have survived are the ones that are run by fans. The corporations, that's where I have an issue. But I think there is a disconnect that corporations have with fans. I think Star Wars is the worst example, taking a beloved brand that you could almost do no wrong. Slap a Star Wars sticker on a Frisbee, you'll sell more Frisbees.
That's right.
But it was horribly mismanaged, I think, starting with the Star Wars sequels and not reuniting telling a Han, Luke, and Leia story. If you're going to see sequels to Star Wars, why not put the characters that, have decades of name recognition rather than, you can launch some new characters. We would expect that. But that was horribly mismanaged. I'm surprised people care about it as much as they do. We are actually on my Film Threat YouTube channel. I'm not sure if you're aware. It's the trial of the millennium.
Oh.
We are putting Lucasfilm and Disney on trial for the murder of the Star Wars franchise.
Well, they murdered them with forced constipation and poor parenting. So it really wasn't a glorious way out for any of the characters that we loved.
Not at all.
Grew up with.
If you go to the Film Threat YouTube channel, our first video is reading the charges. There are 9 charges against Disney Lucasfilm. The jury are everyone in the chat. Everyone in the jury is the chat and viewers. You can vote on who you think, on the result of this case. We're treating it like a real court case. We have a sketch artist. We have counselors, defense and prosecution. We're going to run it over the next 10 weeks or so. I hope you watch it. I hope some other YouTube channels actually watch it like it's a real court case.
Absolutely. And folks, the link is in the description. Make sure you click and go on over, check out Film Threat, and find out is Lucasfilm, and I can imagine that the individuals at the top of Lucasfilm are standing in for it. Are they guilty of murdering this franchise?
Well, we'll see. We're calling the show is called Critics Court Star Wars on Trial. It's a trial show. And, while we're having fun with it, the conversation's absolutely real. So I can't wait until we've got some upcoming guests that are going to be pretty amazing. But there is a weird thing where you see and a lot of people in this industry have worked themselves up where they're a nerd who just happened to get to a position of power and could finally do something. For example, give you a good example is James Gunn, legit nerd, knows his comics like anyone. Oddly, James Gunn could not get hired as a writer on a Disney Plus Marvel series because they don't want people who know the comics.
Yeah, well.
What does that tell you? So,
It's amazing to me. It just suggests that they are completely involved in incompetency. That's the only thing you can come away with, is that they are gatekeeping and they are keeping out all the people who could help them be successful. So bizarre, truly, truly bizarre. Well, folks, that's all we've got for you today. The X-Men, they are coming to Marvel, and the writer's strike is the perfect opportunity for reassessment. At the same time, Guardians of the Galaxy looks pretty darn good. I don't know, though, that it will overcome the budget that it has and the hardships that the MCU has created for itself. It's like the boy who cried wolf. We've had so many times now of being told, oh, it's great, it's great, it's great. I'm not sure audiences are going to believe it. And again, it is a little bit, shall we say, prevented from being as good as it could be at the box office simply because James Gunn has created a movie he wants to create. And that's not bad, but it means that not everybody is going to love this film for reasons that have to do with it not being a fun popcorn flick that kids can enjoy. And I think that will also dampen the repeat viewings. But in terms of an artistic triumph and in terms of showing how you end a trilogy, wow, James Gunn has knocked it out of the park. I gave it an 8 out of 10 over on That Park Place. If you want to see my full thoughts on the movie, go check it out over there, thatparkplace.com. Well, folks, we'll see what happens with the X-Men. We'll see what happens with the writer's strike. The longer this goes on, I think the more and more studios may be looking at artificial intelligence and saying, maybe that's how we want to go. It won't go on strike. And the more this goes on, the more studios like Marvel might say, all of this secondary and tertiary stuff, let's drop it. Let's bring in our bigs. It's time for the X-Men. It's time for Star-Lord. And who knows? Maybe we'll even get more Rocket. Folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, keep learning, keep growing, and keep having fun.
Make sure to catch The Pro Show Thursdays 5 to 7 Eastern Time. Entertainment Explained, The Culture Curve Conquered, live with Pro and all his friends.